Hello, you're watching Transbrations. I'm nahshondion. In honor and celebration of Black History Month, my first special guest is Secretary Shirley Weber, a native of Hope, Arkansas, and an academic and politician nominated to serve as the 31st California Secretary of State by Governor Gavin Newsom on December 22nd, 2020, and sworn into office on January 29th, 2021. She's California's first Black Secretary of State and only the fifth African American to serve as a state constitutional officer in California's 170-year history. Secretary Weber was previously a member of the California State Assembly for the 79th Assembly District, which includes portions of San Diego County. As a member of the California Legislative Black Caucus, she was the first African American to be elected to the California State Legislature south of Los Angeles. While Secretary Weber was an Assembly member, she authored AB 3121, a historical bill approved by Governor Gavin Newsom in May of 2020, and established a 9-member task force to inform Californians about slavery and to explore ways the state might provide reparations for slavery to African Americans. Secretary Weber is a powerful voice for justice who has dedicated her career to defending and strengthening our most fundamental civil rights, including the right to vote. In a time of unprecedented partisan attacks on our democracy, Secretary Weber is standing firm, standing straight, and standing strong to protect, secure, and expand California's right to vote. Hello, Secretary Weber. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. This is Black History Month. You are my first guest. It is an honor. I'm honored to have you here with me. I've been paying attention to AB 3121 since May of 2020, when I first started hearing about it in the media. I've been very excited. It's some of the best and most encouraging news that I've heard in a very, very, very long time. When did you first become aware of reparations or hear about 40 acres and a mule?
You know, I became aware of reparations as a scholar, as a historical scholar, and figuring out the 40 acres and a mule and what happened with the reparations and that we didn't get it. And I've watched it over the last 40 years with the constant efforts at the national level to try to get reparations. Mm-hmm. I decided after the last iteration of it, of the reparations piece, and I think it was in 2018, I think it was, I decided when that year ended and we were entering a new session, I said, you know what? The nation is struggling with reparations because it's all the political entities that are there, and it doesn't seem to be much political will to do it.
The months following the Civil War and the start of Reconstruction offered African Americans in the South hope for equality. It also offered the possibility of owning land. Within months, African Americans would be betrayed by a harsh reality. You probably heard the phrase 40 acres and a mule. Here's what happened. In January 1865, a meeting in Savannah, Georgia, between Union military leader General William Tecumseh Sherman and a group of 20 black ministers resulted in a plan to redistribute confiscated and abandoned Confederate land from South Carolina to Florida. They called the land Sherman's Reserve. Newly freed slaves would be allocated 40 acres of land along with a mule. The phrase, which became well known even then, spread quickly. The plan had the potential to revolutionize race relations in the South and the economic future of the African American community.
The significance about formerly enslaved being given the land that they had actually worked was that they would be able to generate wealth as well as create wealth generationally.
By the summer of 1865, thousands of black families had settled on portions of the Sherman Reserve and were excited to plot their futures. But later that year, as part of his Reconstruction plan, actually intended to appease the former Confederacy, President Andrew Johnson abruptly canceled the order, giving the land back to its previous owners.
The United States had the opportunity to make it possible for the formerly enslaved people to be economically independent, and the country failed to do it.
That initial meeting more than 100 years ago between General Sherman and Savannah's leading black ministers was historic. At least for a brief moment in history, the opinion of black leaders had led directly to a radical public policy initiative. Remarkably, over a century and a half later, on June 19, 2019, the House of Representatives held a hearing on H.R. 40, a bill named in honor of the famous phrase, 40 acres and a mule. The bill would establish a commission to study the concept of reparations for slavery and Jim Crow segregation, including the merits of a formal apology by the United States government.
I saw what we've done in California with the bills that deal with lethal force. I saw what we've done with racial profiling. I've seen what we've done to help the Native Americans and what have you. And so I said, you know, what better example should there be than for California to decide to do reparations? Mm-hmm. And so I authored the bill, got the support of the Black Caucus. And amazingly, we pushed it through, and people were shocked. It only took us less than a year to get reparations approved in California. And it's been an interesting journey because California now has to grapple with how do we respond to it? What do we begin to do in the immediate and the long-term effect to really deal with the issue of reparations? Some people were upset that we didn't wait for Washington and Washington, D.C. And I just felt that had been a long journey, too long for me, and that we needed to do something immediately.
Governor Gavin Newsom signed several bills into law today addressing police reform and racial injustice, including a law that will open the door to paying reparations for slavery.
Let's mark this moment, point deep pride for the work you did to get this bill down to my desk and to get the support, the broad support, including Republican support, a bipartisan bill on reparations.
A task force will now be created to come up with proposals on how to pay reparations to Black Americans and who would be eligible.
And what has happened, of course, since then is that we've got folks with reparations commissions up and down the state, up and down various other states. Everybody now is doing some reparations, which I think is great. We've got nonprofit organizations here in San Diego that are looking at ways to provide down payments for people to have homes who've never owned property before. So everybody's thinking, you know, they can do something. They can all do something to at least address this issue that has been ignored for 400 years. What are you going to do to compensate this group of people that you consistently discriminated against? Not just doing the slavery, but even in all the Jim Crow eras that have basically taken away their resources, put them on the bottom of wealth in this nation. What are you going to do to basically to pay them back as you have paid everybody else back? The Asians, the Holocaust. We've done reparations with people we didn't even do any harm to, like in the Holocaust. And you have clear examples of harm done to African Americans and we've done nothing. So I'm optimistic about the fact that we can be innovative and creative, and that we can turn this narrative around and basically do what we know we have to do to compensate African Americans for slavery that existed in California, even though we were in a slave state. For all the land that had been taken in redlining and those kinds of things. Every domain that stole people property, knowing that they weren't going to do anything with it, like at the beach. And so, we've got an opportunity in California to demonstrate that we can show the rest of the state what reparations looks like.
Symbolic or rather suggestive of the world we're living in currently. I mean, after watching last night's debate, this signing can't come too soon. And so in particular, let me thank everybody for meeting this moment, for all of the hard work that went into creating the moments of deliberative speed and energy and effort to get these bills to my desk. Many of these bills I'm very familiar, have been years and years in the making. In some respects, it's rather sad that I'll be signing a couple of these bills that they weren't addressed decades ago. It's rather remarkable for all of California's leadership, for the leadership of so many of you assembled here today, that we still need to be talking about jury selection. We still need to talk about race in relationship to sentencing guidelines and the like. It's just remarkable that we haven't established these frameworks and these criterias in the past, but I'm very pleased nonetheless that we're finally here and that we have the kind of leadership assembled here on this call that made this all possible. Accordingly, I'm very proud. I don't know, and Dr. Weber, you'll talk more eloquently and more specifically about the reparations bill that you championed, but the fact that we are here at scale, a state as large as ours, advancing this cause where it's not just a question on a questionnaire for a candidate running for office, but it's actually taking shape here, at least the first step. Boy, that's a meaningful moment in this conversation, which as well is so long overdue. And so I couldn't be more honored, more pleased to be here with all of you, more honored and pleased with so many of the champions that are with us. And no further ado, I just want to launch with one of our great champions on not just the issue of racial justice and social justice, but someone who helped advance the moment we celebrated last year around police accountability and so many other extraordinary causes related to racial justice and reconciliation. And that's Dr. Shirley Weber. And Dr. Weber, let's mark this moment, point deep pride for the work you did to get this bill down to my desk and to work with so many constituencies and stakeholders to make this bill possible and to get the support, the broad support, including Republican support, a bipartisan bill on reparation, proving a paradigm that we hope will be resonant all across the United States. Dr. Weber, thank you so much. Turning it over to you.
Thank you, Governor Newsom. I'm really honored to be here and appreciative of the fact that you're signing AB 3121 as well as AB 3070. This is an extremely important time for all of us because we know California tries to lead the way in terms of civil rights, and we have a responsibility to do that. And oftentimes people will say, well, why can't we wait for the federal government to do its part? And I think most folks have waited a while. But we know that California can lead the way, that we can demonstrate what it is to talk about reparations and to try to repair people's lives that we have obviously had a negative impact. California has come to terms with many of its issues, but it has yet to come to terms with its role in slavery. And the fact that that many of our families, my family came to California because they thought this was a golden state with tremendous opportunity. And it was in comparison to coming from Hope, Arkansas. But they also had to come to realization that this state has deeply rooted issues about race and slavery, and that we can demonstrate in what we do through all of our institutions of what it means to be enslaved, the negative impact, and how we need to repair individuals to do that. So we're talking about really addressing the issues of justice and fairness in this country that we have to address. I'm also grateful for the fact that we're also addressing the issue too, this time, of jury selection. We've done a lot of things that most of you mentioned, my bills on the police use of force and racial profiling and all these things we've done. And yet at the same time, we still have to deal with so many other issues, and the jury selection is extremely important. So 3070 is an extremely important bill, just like 2131, to begin to bring the kind of justice and fairness that is necessary. California has a tremendous opportunity. We're the 5th largest economy in the world. And which means if we can do it, others can do it also. And that becomes important as we make this issue an important issue that's there, to try to educate all Californians about the impact of slavery, that after 400 years, we still have that impact. And there's still a need and a necessary opportunity for us to begin to address that issue. So I'm very grateful to you, Governor, for basically seeing these two bills that were, that both of them end up being bipartisan, but the the one on reparations was even more bipartisan than the one on jury selection. And yet at the same time, we fought hard every step of the way. I want to thank you for your support in influencing those who eventually at some point had to come across the line. Thanking the Supreme Court justices who helped us to make this a better bill, that to push forward with so many others fighting against us every step of the way for 3070. You know, I always take the hard things in life, and that's what I do because it's important. After spending 40 years as a professor and a founder of Africana Studies at San Diego State, I know the importance of reparations. I know the importance of history, of getting our information correct, and basically beginning to move California forward. I want to thank all of those who are online, as well as so many others. You know, my caucus is here, the Black Caucus. I chair the Black Caucus, and we have been a force this year in terms of social justice and equal opportunity and change. We have pushed the hard bills forward. We have stood strong as a caucus to not only deal with these issues, but as you know, ACA 5 coming forward with Proposition 16 to restore affirmative action to California. Those things are critical, and this caucus has stood firm on every one of those issues. And so I want to thank my caucus members who've come in today. We're a small caucus. We're one of the smallest caucus. There's only 10 of us, yet we are 10 powerful individuals making a difference in California. And I want people to understand that there are only 10 African Americans in the legislature, the Senate, and the Assembly. And yet we, as a force, a collective force, have pushed forth the kind of legislation that really makes a difference. And we thank our colleagues for joining us from the Chicano Caucus, the API Caucus, the Women's Caucus, who've joined us in making a difference. I want to thank, I see one of our real champions, Ice Cube, who's online, who's on with us today. I want to thank him also for all of his tweets and all of his words that came forward to push us to say, listen, the nation is watching and we need this to be done. And so I'm so appreciative of not only you taking time to do that, but you're taking time out of your day to be with us. So I'm very proud of the fact that we have 2 bills that will really make a difference in California. And we have so many others that are on our list that are also being signed by the governor. But to sign 3121 is groundbreaking for the United States. To basically say this state is going to deal with the issue of reparations, and we're going to make a difference as a result of it, and truly focus upon this issue that has been a part of California's issue. And of course, 3070 to really begin to change jury selections in California is critically important. So I'm excited about being here today. I want to thank you so very much, all of you who worked so hard on this bill, my staff, the members of the caucus, the other staff persons who worked hard, the governor's office to get this bill forward, to get it done, and to get it now to be getting it signed in California makes a tremendous difference. It is going to be an exciting opportunity with both of these bills to make a difference and to begin to move the agenda. I want to let people know, first of all, that this bill, both of these bills were done before the Floyd incident, was done before the pandemic. I want you to understand that, because some people think these are issues that just came forward and it was the right time at the right moment. These bills were done last year. We authored these bills at the end of last year, and we were pushing these bills forward when all of the issues of the COVID virus and everything else came forward. So this is not just because of the circumstances we face. What happens, of course, is those circumstances reinforced the fact that what we were saying all along was true, that we needed to deal with these issues that in terms of our community, but these did not come because of that. But they help to reinforce the fact that this is truth and that it's a necessity for us to address it. So I want to make sure that's clear, because some people think we're just responding to the moment. We're responding to the history of California and the life of Black people in California and in this nation that has to be addressed every day, and not simply because we're obviously faced with a challenge of trying to appease individuals to make them believe that we're going to move forward. This is because of the necessity of where we are. So I want to thank all of you who've come. I want to thank the governor and the council and those who worked on these 2 bills. I'm proud to be the author, proud to be chair of the caucus, the Black Caucus, the California Legislative Black Caucus, and the powerful group that they are, and the colleagues who've helped us so much.
You had said that there was redlining. You start to put it all in context. We've waited for Congress to take up this reparations bill for 35 years. They just can't move. So I said, why am I consistently supporting this thing? Let's do it ourselves. We're such a huge state with wealth. We can be an example for others. We got the bill to form the task force passed out of both houses in 4 or 5 months, not 40 years. I think California can lead. And go ahead. You had said, something that you've said in the past is never wait for the big moment, do it now.
Yeah, because oftentimes we wait for the perfect time to get something done, when all the stars are aligned and you want to get it done. That seldom happens when everything is easy but when something is happening, the moment is now. The moment is now. When I thought about reparations and I thought, well, we could wait another 3 or 4 years to see if Congress will get itself together. Well, it wasn't. And so I figured we'd do it now. We had lynchings and all kinds of things in this country, and people took forever to get an anti-lynching bill, and it just passed recently. So, the process at the top is long and difficult, and sometimes doesn't yield what you want. When we have a legislature that's finally a reflection, and it looks like the state of California. What a great opportunity to demonstrate that we can deal with the issues of reparations in California.
All right, it's the law.
Okay, yay.
I just signed into law the Emmett Till Anti-Lynching Act, making lynching a federal hate crime for the first time in American history. Hundreds of similar bills have failed to pass. Over the years, several federal hate crime laws were enacted, including one I signed last year to combat COVID-19 hate crimes. But no federal law expressly prohibited lynching, none, until today. Between 1877 and 1950, more than 4,400 black people were murdered by lynching, most in the South, but some in the North as well. That's a lot of folks, man, and a lot of silence for a long time. Lynching was pure terror to enforce the lie that not everyone belongs in America, not everyone is created equal. Terror to systematically undermine hard-fought civil rights. Terror, not just in the dark of the night, but in broad daylight. Innocent men, women, and children hung by nooses from trees, bodies burned and drowned and castrated. Their crimes? Trying to vote, trying to go to school, trying to own a business or preach the gospel. False accusations of murder, arson, and robbery. Simply being black. Emmett Till was an only child. He grew up in the south side of Chicago with his mother Mamie and grandparents and cousins. In the summer of 1955, Emmett turned 14 years old, ready to start 8th grade in the fall. Before school started, he wanted to visit his cousins in Mississippi. So Emmett's mom dropped him off at the train station in Chicago. Her own family fled the Delta decades earlier. So she told him the unwritten rules she had to follow. Quote, "Be very careful how you speak. Say yes, sir, and no, ma'am. And do not hesitate to humble yourself if you have to get down on your knees." End of quote. That same speech, that same admonition, too many black parents today still have to use that admonition. They have to tell their children when it comes to encounters with the law enforcement, and so many other circumstances. She kissed Emmett goodbye. It was the last time she saw her son alive. Days after he arrived in Mississippi, Emmett's mutilated body was found in a river. His mother demanded that her son be sent home so that his funeral in Chicago could be an open casket. Here's what she said: "Let the people see what I've seen." America and the world saw what she saw. Although he was one of thousands who were lynched, his mother's courage to show the world what was done to him energized the civil rights movement. But the law is not just about the past. It's about the present and our future as well. From the bullets in the back of Ahmaud Arbery to countless other acts of violence, countless victims known and unknown. The same racial hatred that drove the mob to hang a noose brought that mob carrying torches out of the fields of Charlottesville just a few years ago. Racial hate isn't an old problem. It's a persistent problem. And I know many of the civil rights leaders here know, you heard me say it 100 times. Hate never goes away. It only hides. It hides under the rocks. Given just a little bit of oxygen, it comes roaring back out, screaming. But what stops it is all of us, not a few, All of us have to.
I've been amazed with some of those who come forward with information. Some of my white colleagues who were part of, in their region, their areas where they lived, had all kinds of negative things and had all kinds of discriminatory practices, and they brought forth deeds and things that people had stolen people's property, all kinds of things, because people know that there was some wrong done. And that we'll never be the state that we're supposed to be as long as we keep sweeping California's history under the rug. We need to face it. We need to find a remedy.
And the saying is, as California goes, so goes the nation.
Yes, yes.
I just read today, well, I know they're doing something, reparations for some community members in St. Paul, Minnesota, the Black African-American community of Rondo, which was about 600 residents were displaced because of I-94. I've been to that community, that area. Read something today in Philadelphia. They want a task force created. I know there's one in Jersey. I know that there's mayors throughout the United States. I know Los Angeles has a commission now. So the impact of you creating AB 3021 is I mean, other than I guess Obama being elected as first Black president, African-American president. This is very historical. My grandfather is from Marshall, Texas, which is in East Texas, Harrison County. At one point, Harrison County, East Texas, it was the location of the most cotton plantations in the state and most of the enslaved. By 1850, landowners in Harrison County held more slaves than any other county in Texas until the end of the war. The census of 1860 counted almost 9,000 slaves in Harrison County, 60% of the county's total population. By 1860, Marshall was the fourth largest city in Texas and the seat of its most affluent county. My grandparents are from East Texas, my mom's mom and dad. During the 1930s, they had separately migrated to Riverside County in California, and they were picking crops out there in Ripley. And during the 1980s, I always remember my grandfather, Abazine Scott, always mentioning, 40 acres and a mule, 40 acres and a mule, which, some people turned it into a joke.
We gotta update these reparations to stuff that's gonna benefit my life. I don't want 40 acres and a mule, that is too much work. I can't do summer Fridays when I have 40 acres and a mule. I'm in demand. I'm in demand.
40 acres and a mule was a special field order, number 15, a wartime order proclaimed by Union General William Tecumseh. And that was January 16th, 1865, which was 168 years ago, I believe.
Right.
because the anniversary had just passed. But as my grandparents aged, them, along with, I'm sure, millions of other African Americans were disappointed that they did not get those 40 acres and a mule, which prevented them from creating and generating wealth.
Right, they didn't, and then the irony of it is that after Lincoln died and Johnson, I guess, was the president, the interesting thing is that they paid white people instead of Black people. That the money that was supposed to go to African Americans for reparations for them to start, as with some land and a mule, they turned around and paid whites because they said they took away white resources by letting the slaves go free. So they counted the cost of that, and they paid white folks for losing their slaves. And so it was a twisted turn of events that really, once again, continued to dig deep into the hearts and soul of African Americans, that they were being placed into second-class citizenship with no land, no resources, and the people who had denied them their freedom were being paid, and were going to continue to oppress them through the Jim Crow system, through sharecropping. Yeah.
Over the past year, since the task force, last summer, the task force released their first 500-page draft calling for reparations to address the horrors and harms perpetrated against Black Americans in California and the nation. More than 150 years after slavery was abolished, its legacy remains embedded in the political, legal, health, financial, educational, cultural, environmental, social, and economic systems of the United States, the report stated. This recent draft is only part one of the task force second part, which is expected to be released this summer.
News at 9. Read the report with an open heart and an open mind. That's the message from the chair of the California Reparations Task Force.
The panel just released the findings of their groundbreaking interim report, which calls for reparations for African Americans. KCAL 9 political reporter Tom Waite has more.
I hope that all people, regardless of color and creed, really read this report with an open heart and an open mind.
Camila Moore, chair of the trailblazing California Reparations Task Force, urging the public to see for themselves the findings in their interim report.
The conclusion of the report is, reparations are owed, and what this, interim report, which is nearly 600 pages long and 13 chapters, it pretty much details or substantiates the claim for reparations for the African American community.
The report came together with exhaustive analysis from historical records, testimony from experts and members of the community, among other elements. The report says, in part, 400 years of discrimination has resulted in an enormous and persistent wealth gap between Black and white Americans. The report breaks down in great detail the devastating consequences of slavery and the continued systems of institutional racism that carry on in the legal system, housing, employment, and beyond.
This report also marks the study phase in our efforts, and the next phase is the development phase, where the 9-member task force is having intentional conversations about, okay, what does reparations look like in light of these harms that we just outlined.
Jody Armour is an author and professor of law at USC. He studies and teaches about the intersection of race, law, and politics.
This is an important moment for us collectively, because if we don't share a common truth, we can't share a common purpose.
Professor Armour points out just a couple of examples of inequities playing out today: the disproportionate Black populations in the prison system and among the unhoused.
And you can't help but notice that they're disproportionately Black. There's 75% of them are Black. And you go to San Quentin, where I take my students, again, we see the demographics. Blacks are grossly overrepresented in those two most miserable places in our society, Skid Row and Cell Block.
Also in the report, Black achievement despite oppression.
In this report, you'll find a detailed list of contributions of the African American community to the state of California and the United States, despite that ongoing oppression and human degradation that my community experiences.
Governor Gavin Newsom signed the bipartisan legislation creating this panel back in 2020, making California the only state to move forward with such a study and a plan. Reporting from the newsroom, I'm Tom Waite, KCAL 9 News.
Since then, so many communities outside of the African American community are talking about reparations. Africans, Asians, pretty much all communities, and a lot of people have negative things to say and feel like we don't deserve reparations.
Mining even affected white people like Russian Jews and Black and Mexican individuals. and then you feel entitled to $500 billion of taxpayer money because of over-policing, because people committed crimes and got caught. Are you even using your head? Imagine thinking that the problem is getting caught and not committing the crime. So yes, people who want reparations don't want to work. But again, in a state like California, which is 40% Latino, a quarter of its population are first-generation immigrants. Latinos were majorly discriminated against, came here with absolutely nothing as immigrants, and still managed to build wealth. What's your excuse? And you're asking these hardworking individuals to pay because you're too lazy to work. And this isn't about color, because not everybody of one color thinks the exact same way. This is to people who think this way.
I'm just going to read some of the ignorant quotes. All for it if the recipients get the maximum penalty for violent crime. The American dream is no longer work hard to get ahead. It's inherit wealth, sue someone, and now claim reparations. If I can show Bezos' great-great-grandfather stole money from my ancestors, does Jeff Bezos now owe me money? Next, let's have reparations for women of all colors, religion, ages, who've been paid less for the same work of a man. Many Native Americans and Mexican Americans were pushed off their land with none or paltry unjust compensation. Some who were citizens got deported. Will they get reparations too? Just skip it and build a high-speed rail. $500 billion? Let's triple the size of our high-speed rail and avoid this absurd expenditure. It's not reparations, it's vote buying. Let this state fall away into the ocean before it fatally infects the rest of us. This is a huge mistake. There's many ways to help minorities. Reparations is not one. This is an example of progressives' continual debasement from self-inflicted wounds. Sad, ill-advised policy. 77% of Black Americans feel they deserve free money from the government for being Black and feel it's fair to ask innocent white, Hispanic, and Asian Americans to pay up for their historical grievances. Mexican Americans are the largest group to be lynched in California, in Los Angeles and California, and the second largest group to be lynched in the nation. We might deserve some of the California reparations as well, unfortunately. So those were some of the, and there's a lot of other absurd comments that are going around. African American had mentioned, this is their playbook, hate on our efforts, sit on the sidelines and do nothing to help. Then when the momentum is up and we are close to the finish line, jump in for the co-opt.
Well, we've been through this before, and if people had felt that we were deserving of reparations, it probably would have occurred. And yet they feel that those who have done a lot less for this country, who have suffered a lot less, should be paid. And when we pay reparations for. And over the years we have, even during Obama's administration, there was reparations paid to some Jews in New York that people felt they should have been more successful. Yet we did not create the Holocaust. And interestingly enough, we've never argued about the damage done to individuals, the giving, the issues with the Native Americans and what happened with them, and they were given their land and sovereignty and so forth and so on. But we've never complained about when they wanted the University of California free admissions. That happened recently. We have never attacked others for getting what they believe they deserve. As usual, we basically knock down the doors, create opportunities, and then we are the least to benefit from the opportunities that are there. I'm not surprised that folks have issues. I ask people just very honestly, if you were one of the individuals in this country, maybe you were white and your labor was stolen for 400 years, for 150 years, your labor was stolen. Your opportunities were denied for another 100 or more years. So you're looking at 200, 300, 400 years where you have not, you have had all your dreams dashed. No matter how hard you work, people have stolen your land, created, redline your community, run your community down, so forth and so on. Poor quality schools for our kids, you name it, we got it. The question becomes, what price that you would put on it? What price would you put on the legacy that you leave for your children and those things? Some of us have struggled and gotten a little bit in spite of the negative things, but I tell even those, I said, even those African Americans who've been relatively successful in achieving a few things probably could have achieved a whole lot more. If they had not had their hands tied behind their backs and their feet tied, that they could not do much more. And so when we began to look at it as a nation, we consistently acknowledge that we have errors, that we have done some things. But in the case of African Americans, it is not just a one and done experience. It is embedded in the essence of this country, so that African Americans are last hired even today. They are not seen as someone who should be protected. We've suffered double-digit unemployment when other people have had 5% and 6% unemployment. We've always been double-digit, 10, 20% unemployment rate. Highest amount of us being incarcerated, intimidated, and killed. I mean, all those things are not accident. It's not because Black people are the baddest people in the world. I've seen police stop individuals who start fighting with them and all kinds of things, and nothing happened to those people. I've seen us stopped, and there's an effort of being polite, being thoughtful, and then it blows up and somebody ends up dead.
Good morning. My name is Chris Holden. I'm Assembly member from the 41st Assembly District, and I am the former most immediate past president and chair of the Black Caucus. With all the challenges that our state and nation has been facing in the caucus, stepping up and recognizing the need and importance to address these issues head on, it is important that as we start this press conference that we call upon a higher authority. And so I'd like to call upon God's presence in this gathering today. And so if you can join me in a prayer as we lead this press conference. Heavenly Father, your word says in 2 Chronicles 7:14, if my people, which are called by my name, shall humble themselves and pray, and seek my face, and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven, and forgive their sins, and will heal their land. Father, we thank you for your word, for it encourages us and provides light to our feet as we seek your way forward. For these are dark and perilous times for Black Americans and America as a whole. The constant reminder of blatant disregard for the lives of so many Black men and women at the hands of police officers has rocked our collective consciousness. Nelson Mandela reminds us, for to be free is not merely to cast off one's chains, but to live in a way that respects and enhances the freedom of others. Lord, we pray that this becomes our reality. We seek you, God, for hope this morning, that confident expectation, that firm assurance regarding things that are unclear and unknown. Lord, you are our hope. Bless now those you have called for a time such as this, that their minds be filled with your divine wisdom and that they declare your power and authority over these challenges before us. Move now by your Spirit, Lord, that there be a shift in the atmosphere, and your peace, which exceeds all understanding, fall upon your people. In Jesus' name, amen. It's now my privilege to call to the microphone our illustrious chair, Dr. Shirley Weber.
Thank you, and good morning. I have tried to avoid these kinds of experiences as much as I possibly can. Because when you have spent the vast majority of over 3 decades struggling for equality and justice and trying to explain the life of African Americans to this nation, it becomes painful to continue the conversation. And I come to you as a legislator, a person who has spent the last 8 years trying to make a difference in this nation, in this capital, trying to convince my colleagues that there's a reality out there that some of them don't understand, that they would like to refuse to see and to be a part of. And we have all, as a caucus, taken our hits and been the victims of attacks as a result of us trying to simply create for ourselves in this nation a place for African Americans to be. And so it's difficult for me as a kid who sat on her porch in Los Angeles in 1965, where the National Guards were in our front yard, and to see the burnings and the looting and the attacks and the continuation of all the revolts that have existed in this nation around police brutality, basically targeted toward African Americans. And to see after all of that, that every incident brings me back to the same spot, where we're still mistreated, still disrespected, and the issue is always taken away from the real issue in this nation. The issue we face for over 400 years is the enslavement, the mistreatment, and often the efforts at genocide of the African in this country. That is the fact of life. And too often when these incidents occur, we somehow or another begin at that point and end up somewhere else talking about property and those kinds of things, that we do not condone the destruction of property and the fire burning and the things that have happened. But we can never, ever let ourselves lose sight of why we are here. We are here because for 400 years, African American men and women in this country have been disrespected. That this country has taught itself to hate African Americans and to deny the history that has brought us here. It has taught others that we are inhuman and less than people to be respected, not only just in people's everyday lives, but the way this country was structured, the laws that were written, the kinds of prosecutions that have occurred as early as in the 1700s have led us to this country to have seared its conscience with regards to the pain of African Americans, so that they could separate the mothers from their children and then wonder why the mothers cried, because they were not supposed to be human like everyone else. That we could enter a period of Jim Crow where we could lynch African American men, bring their families to see it, their children to watch it, to smell the burning of skin, and to mutilate their bodies and sell their parts in this nation. And then believe that somehow or another we could treat those individuals as we do everyone else. And the reality is that we cannot. We cannot deny the history of this country. And for me, as I look at this, the issues continue to get worse. Because for the first time, this pandemic of hate has spread across the nation to every small city in America. And we either are going to face it and fight it, or we will find ourselves once again in the same position we have been before. I tell all of my colleagues, this is not just an issue of race in America. This is an issue of the hatred of African Americans in this country. And if we continue to pretend that it's just a small issue, or if we divert it off to others who have similar kinds of issues, we will always find ourselves back in this same spot. This is an African American issue. Someone told me the other day, we are African Americans. Unfortunately, we are Africans without the history and culture of Africa, because we were stolen from the land that never had a chance to allow Africa and its values to root in us. And we are Americans without the privilege of being an American. And so we stand here today as the African American Caucus to share with you very briefly what we have done for all of our lives in this country, that we have fought injustice. We have fought for those things that are right. And yet at the same time, we are somehow heartened by the fact that those who know the truth refuse to stand for the truth. The governor was clear yesterday when he said this is not an African American problem that they have created. This is a problem that others have created. And while we fight for the solution, we know that the solution lies in the changing of this nation, and for those who don't look like us, to for once take the banner up and fight the battle that is so essential. We have fought it. We have given our lives. We have given all that we have. Our parents, our grandparents have sacrificed in this nation everything they have to try to be good Americans. We have fought in every war. We've carried every banner that's there. We have given the moral conscience to this nation about what is right and what is just. And at the same time, as we do all of that, we still find ourselves the last one in the door. We have kicked down doors of opportunity for everyone to only have them run over our back and snatch those opportunities off the table and forget from which they have come. We want to make sure, and we have done that in this House, as we continue to deal with our colleagues, that the 10 of us in the Assembly and the Senate will continue to fight this battle, because we have to, not just for others, but because that is who we are and that is our legacy. I listened last night to the spiritual that says, I ain't no ways tired. I've come too far from where I started from. But nobody told me the road would be easy. But I don't believe he brought me this far just to leave me.
So you look at all of these things, and I ask people, you put a price on it. You put a price on it. You know, cheap labor, free labor, you put a price on it. And I think what will happen is that you will realize that, you know, that it's difficult to put a price on it, but clearly there's a price that has been paid by those of us who have had these opportunities snatched away from us, and we have to create some greater opportunities for us. So I'm not surprised at all because of I knew eventually, and that's why when we did reparations, I didn't try to form some big task force at the beginning and have every person in the world come to weigh in on the subject before we got the bill passed, because I knew that at some point the opposition would come, and they're going to come, and they're going to come and feel that we deserve nothing, because in their minds, they improved our lives by basically kidnapping us on the shores of Africa and bringing us to this country. They think that was a great feat, that they basically gave us more than we had, which no one else, even other groups would not tolerate and would not want to be taken away from their culture and their background in order to basically be in the United States. So I expect the opposition to be ugly and be unsupported. I'm optimistic and hopeful that the governor and the legislature will begin the process of dealing with reparations.
Since age 13, I've had a front row seat to social injustice. I grew up in Pasadena, California, and my father and Rodney King's father were fishing buddies. And at that time, in 1991, me and my mother, we were living behind Rodney's mother in Pasadena. We had just moved back to California from Oklahoma, and we were living in the apartment that Rodney had vacated out of with his wife. So I had woke up that Sunday morning to just hearing noises that I had never heard before. And, you know, that was some 30 years ago. And to see everything that happened, you know, in 2020, and just to see how, just having a front row seat to how that affected my community. And, you know, just being a young person at that time, you know, you don't really understand. I mean, you understand how a person is, you know, injured in the violence, but you don't understand the significance of it. And then as you get older, you can look back and you can just see just how, I can see just how much it has impacted my community. But for it to still be happening, and for it to be happening on the scale that it is happening at this point, it is, I don't think devastating is even the correct word.